Hello, my name is Tanya Nirvan. I am Program Director at Jewish Community Center in Montenegro. Today it's important for us event. Frantisek Sistek will lecture about Jewish Montenegro. And it is 1 hour and half.
Hour and a half.
Yes,
No?
and often you can ask anything if you will questions. Beginner, okay?
Okay, good evening, Shalom. So I'm very happy to be here again in the center. I visited last year, but this is my first lecture here. Well, I'm Frantisek Šistek from Prague. I work at the Institute of History of the Czech Academy of Sciences, so teach at Charles University, and I'm a scholar of the Balkans, focusing on former Yugoslavia.
И спасибо, что пришли. Франчик является профессором в университете в Праге. Он раньше посещал наш центр, но это первая его лекция здесь. Поэтому спасибо, что пришли еще раз.
I've been focusing on former Yugoslavia since I was a student, actually, on history and contemporary events. And I specialized in Montenegro, more or less for a similar reason why I later started to be interested in the Jews of Montenegro, because Montenegro was not well known. Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, Kosovo, I mean, these places were better known than Montenegro, and I wanted to learn more. So in the end, I became the expert on Montenegro.
Он специализировался на Балканах, но именно из-за того, что Черногория является менее изученным регионом, он решил углубиться именно в изучение Черногории, в том числе в изучение еврейства Черногории, истории еврейства Черногории.
So I've been focusing on Montenegro since late 1990s. I came here as a student in 1998 for the first time, and I wrote a lot about different topics, but I also wrote about national and religious minorities in Montenegro. But I asked great Montenegrin historians and other historians from other post-Yugoslav countries sometimes whether there were ever any Jews in Montenegro, and they said, well, no, that's one thing. This is, we never had any Jews. Our country was too poor, too small. I mean, that's really not the case. You will not find anything.
С 1998 года я изучал этнические меньшинства в данном регионе, и именно это натолкнуло меня на вопрос, были ли когда-то здесь евреи, что с их историей.
But I mean, it's not that these historians they were ignorant, but really I can confirm you can do a lot. Like you can spend a lifetime on important topics from Montenegrin history, and you will not find a single mention of any Jews living here or any context. So this was
История Монтенегро очень богатая, очень интересная, длительная, но тем не менее практически нет упоминаний о еврействе в Черногории.
And well, apart from historians, the Jewish community of Yugoslavia, when Yugoslavia existed, with the center in Belgrade, Yugoslavia was more free than most other communist countries. They had good, so the Jews were not hiding as much as in some other countries. Their opinion was as well that there are no Jews in Montenegro. That Montenegro was the only one of the 6 republics of Yugoslavia where there were just no Jews.
И Югославия была одной из самых свободных стран в социалистическом лагере, где евреям не приходилось скрываться. Очень большой еврейский центр находился в Белграде и находится по сей день в Белграде, и всегда был. Но, тем не менее, было непонятно, что происходит в Черногории, что происходило все это время именно в Черногории. Черногория являлась одной из 6 республик бывшей Югославии, и когда в Белграде такой большой центр находился, непонятно, где черногорская история здесь.
So this was the opinion, let's say, maybe still 20 years ago. I mean, there were never any Jews, and there are no Jews in the present in Montenegro. But that has changed. Of course, now there's Jewish infrastructure. There are Jews, and well, there's even it's my book and some other works on Jewish history.
Буквально 20 лет назад еще не было никакой еврейской жизни здесь. Сейчас все изменилось. Сейчас здесь есть и еврейские центры, и еврейская инфраструктура. Вот, например, как здесь мы находимся. Здесь даже есть кошерная еда. Это от себя.
Okay. But actually, there were some historians they did find a little bit about Jewish history about in some periods. Interestingly, my colleague from Prague, Lenka Blechova, she's a historian. She's married to a Montenegrin diplomat, so she lived here for some time. Now she lives in Prague, and she focused on the Middle Ages, and she found some mentions in the archives of Kotor for I mean not much, but everything that she could find. I mean she wrote an article about it. So another person from my country, another historian.
Одна из его коллег в университете Праге, которая была замужем за, наверное, сейчас замужем за черногорским дипломатом, она нашла некоторые исторические доказательства еврейской жизни из Средневековья, что здесь была еврейская жизнь в Средневековье, и нашла она это в Которе.
But then in the last decade, in 2012, a small Jewish community was founded in Montenegro. The first chairman was Jascha Alfandari, and it was, of course, there were mentions of this community in the media. So I became interested. I thought, well, working on Montenegrin topics, I should know more about them. So that's.
Когда в 2012 году здесь появился первый еврейский центр, то есть возобновилась еврейская жизнь, можно сказать, то тогда я стала интересоваться больше этой темой и углубился в ее изучение.
So I thought, well, maybe I'll write something about the present community. Maybe it will be maybe for one article or for one paper at a conference. So I contacted Jascha Alfandari, and I made an interview with him. I visited the Jewish community, and that was in 2017. And I also met the new Rabbi Ari Edelkopf, who just arrived maybe like 2 months before that. So in 2017, I met them both, and I became even more interested in the present and the past of the Jewish community here.
В 2017 году я встретился и с действующим лидером еврейской общины, и с настоящим раввином еврейской общины, и написал статью для конференции.
And then I became more interested. I knew that I started to read more literature, and I thought, well, maybe I'll do a project. Maybe I'll do a longer project because it takes a long time. There are few mentions and some documents here and there, but it's very worth it to explore it in greater depth. So I applied to the Czech Academy of Sciences for a grant, and I got this grant, and I started a long-term research.
From what country? The grant.
Czech Republic.
Czech Republic.
Yes.
И тогда, когда я решил сделать более серьезные исследования на эту тему, я получил грант от Пражского университета на серьезные исследования этой темы, чтобы уже сделать нормальные исследования и выпустить какой-то вот серьезный труд научный.
So I knew there was more to it, but I didn't know where, you know, what I will find. I was sure that I will find more information, but it's not like in some countries with larger communities, you have archives. Maybe the Jewish communities, they had press, they had newspapers, you find stuff like that. But here it's not like you go to an archive and there's something with like Jews in Montenegro written on it, because otherwise someone else would have written such a book long before I was born, probably.
Было сложно искать источники, потому что не было какой-то еврейской жизни, то есть приходилось искать по архивам, буквально по крупицам собирать всю эту информацию. В общем, это такая довольно кропотливая работа, насколько я понимаю.
So basically I try to read a lot about the Jews in other parts of Yugoslavia, and usually there would be a mention or two about someone who was also in Montenegro, just a little bit. Also went to the archives. I used for the more modern period, I used the testimonies of people who survived the Holocaust, and like different sources, and I put it together.
Я искала много разных источников, и в других архивах бывшей Югославии были testimonies, были свидетельства выживших в катастрофу, и было очень мало каких-то данных, которые я мог собрать.
And also I found a local collaborator, a young historian, Boban Batricevic from Cetinje, who focused on wartime and anti-Semitism during the Second World War, because there was a lot of anti-Semitic, I mean, few Jews, but a lot of anti-Semitic text in period press. So he did this part, and he wrote a book on specifically on wartime anti-Semitism during the Second World War.
Исследователь из Cetinje написал книгу о антисемитизме во время Второй мировой войны. Несмотря на то, что было мало евреев, но тем не менее было много антисемитизма.
Yeah. So now I'll and for this project started in 2020, and the book was published late 2022. I wrote the book in the Montenegrin language, but and I got a prize for the manuscript from the Jewish community of Serbia, actually. But it still goes on. I'm writing a larger version in English at present. So hopefully by the end of the year, I hope that I'll manage, and there'll be a larger version with more information.
Исследование началось в 2012 году, закончилось в 2022 году. Сейчас я работаю над более развернутой версией на английском. Это книга на черногорском. Книжка, которая выйдет на английском, труд, который выйдет на английском, он будет более развернутый, более такой обширный.
So now I will turn to the history of the Jews in Montenegro itself. I explained a little bit about the research. So.
Когда я объяснила немножко про то, как происходило как происходило исследование, сейчас уже приступим непосредственно к истории евреев в Монтенегро.
We begin only English, okay?
So we can focus on English. Okay, good.
Okay, so now I'll focus, as I said, on the history of the Jews itself. The first what we have, like the oldest all this proof that there were some Jews on the territory of present-day Montenegro. It's a material proof. It was found by archaeologists in 1960. Actually, a Jewish grave in the place called Dioclea. Dioclea was a city, a Roman city, the biggest city on the territory of Montenegro in Roman times. And in the 2nd century Common Era, to the 2nd century of the Common Era, we can date this grave that was discovered by archaeologists in 1960. Dioclea or Dukla in the local language today. Well, this place, I don't know if you have visited. I recommend you that you visit that place. It's really on the outskirts of present-day Podgorica, just maybe 15 minutes from the city center. Roman ruins. It's a nice area. And archaeologists discovered a grave from the Roman period with 2 skeletons and with Jewish iconography. There's a menorah. There are other things that are comparable to other graves around the Mediterranean. So it's isolated. It was in a necropolis where the other graves, they were Christian and pagan basically. So it's mixed, but this is how it was quite often in the Roman Empire. So there were some Jews at that time. Well, actually, unfortunately, this area with the graves. There was this electric power plant built over it in the 1980s. They claim that they somehow protected the graves, but I don't really believe it. When I visited the place, it doesn't look like there's anything left. And there were some glass objects and the remnants themselves. Also, we don't know where these are today, whether they are in Podgorica or Belgrade, or whether they got lost. So unfortunately, this was discovered, well described, but the grave itself doesn't exist. So that's the 2nd century of Common Era, and now after several more centuries, there's a kind of darkness, historically speaking. There are not that many sources for this period. So again, another mention of the Jews comes only from the medieval period. Actually, there is no proof of like a Jewish settlement on the territory of Montenegro in the Middle Ages. It seems that there was probably no Jewish community. Otherwise, if there was, it would be in sources, especially in Venetian sources. But the context of this territory with the Jews, it was usually that there were Jewish doctors coming to the coast from Dubrovnik, because in Dubrovnik there was a small community. So the first mention is from 14 actually, when a Jewish doctor visited Kotor from Dubrovnik. And there's another mention from 1522, actually discovered by my colleague Lenka Blechova. And well, it's also basically a random encounter. It's a sad story. A Jewish merchant was killed and robbed by the locals near Kotor. He was an Ottoman subject, so the Ottoman Empire asked the Venetians to find out what happened, and they punished some locals for stealing his goods. Well, what we know is that they probably didn't know who he was. It was not like an anti-Semitic incident or anything like that, but this is like a random mention of someone of Jewish origin in these areas. And otherwise, for the rest of the Middle Ages and the early modern period, again, it's mostly doctors from Dubrovnik visiting some rich people from Kotor, mostly, and trying to treat them. Again, no permanent community. and also the locals had maybe sometimes through Dubrovnik, usually they had some links with the Jews. They knew, I mean, they had an idea who the Jews are, that they usually socially they were merchants, but there was no permanent Jewish settlement in this area. Well, and then there's a special story, the story of the false Messiah, Shabtai Tzvi, who came to Ulcin. You might know, you might have heard of this in actually in 1673. The story of Shabtai Tzvi is well known. Gershom Scholem, the great scholar, wrote about him a lot, and now we have in recent years also more evidence from Ottoman sources by Turkish historians, so we can piece it together, and because it's so well known, it's available in English, partly also French and German translations, most of the documents, etc. Well, to make the long story short, well, Shabtai Tzvi, the false Messiah, as you might have heard before, he converted to Islam in 1666, and then after some time he was banished in 1673. He was banished to the present to Ulcin, the southernmost town on the Montenegrin coast. He had followers. He corresponded with people around the Mediterranean. There are some letters that he asked, for example, the Jewish community of Berat in Albania for a prayer book for Yom Kippur. So obviously he was not like completely Islamicized. He was kind of it was kind of syncretic, outwardly Muslim, but he did keep some. He would keep a part of the Jewish traditions. Well, he lived in Ulcin for several years until 1676 when he died. Well, he became a widower there. His wife Sarah died. He remarried again in Ulcin. And he died there in 1676. There were sometimes people visiting him. We know of several people who they left testimonies of visiting him there. So it's basically the last period of his life that he spent in Ulcin, most likely in this tower called the Balšić Tower, or Kula Balšića in Montenegrin language. Now, recently there are some hints. There are some engravings. There are the engravings of the Star of David, and also engravings. Well, this doesn't have to mean that there was someone Jewish, because this what we know as the Star of David, this was also used, the same ornament, basically in the Islamic culture. So if you discover it somewhere from, let's say, the 16th, 17th century, it doesn't have to mean that this was necessarily a Jewish place. But there is some other iconography that was used by the Sabbatians, by this basically this sect of his followers on the other side of the tower. So this together, yes, there was probably some of this some present. We don't know whether he did it himself. I mean, now the tour guides will tell you that, well, this was engraved by Shabtai Tzvi. Well, there's no proof. There's no proof of that. It's just that these are. He was held in this tower. He lived in this tower. He lived relatively freely. He was not a true prisoner. He received imperial pension, so he had some, so he was not truly like imprisoned there. So this is one trace, basically, of the false Messiah. And we know that he died in Ulcin. There was a lot of speculation that he died somewhere else, etc. And there was his grave. But the location of his grave is unknown. Actually, there are several theories about it. According to one tradition, he was buried not far from the place where he lived, not far from the old town, and there were secret pilgrimages. His followers, the Sabbateans, they were visiting the grave. So we know that there were visitors to the grave for etc. But we are not sure where it was. According to tradition, it was above the sea. But this place actually, it's like if you go to Ulcinj, there's a Christian Orthodox church in the area where there were some turbe or this like Muslim graves, and of course he was buried as a Muslim because he officially converted, so there would be nothing special indicated that he was of Jewish origin. But this area, it was after Ulcinj became part of Montenegro, there was this church built, and these graves disappeared. So we don't know, maybe if he was buried there, the grave basically disappeared. But there's another place in Ulcinj, further in town, far, some 2 kilometers from the sea, and there's a Muslim family, a Muslim Albanian family, the Mani family, and they have this turbe, again Muslim grave. They say that it's a grave of a Muslim saint, and they are keeping it. It's on their property. And it is also believed that possibly this could be the grave of Shabtai Tzvi. Actually, I researched. I went to do some field research in Ulcinj. I've been going to the town for even like I've been there many times before. I have some good contacts there, and I found out that there's a local tradition. Actually, that there are some strange people. There are some families who are kind of all related, and that they have some different traditions than the rest. Otherwise, they are Muslims. So it seems that this Mani family, it's supposedly one of them, they might be the descendants of the Sabbateans. They are usually these converts. They are called dönme in Turkish. In other places, we know that they lived in Thessaloniki. There are still some in Istanbul, actually, but no one thought of this, that they might be also some of these descendants in Ulcinj. But we don't know for sure. I mean, the family claims that, well, okay, this is our saint, but he's not. I mean, he has nothing to do with Shabtai Tzvi. So I mean, there are some indications that this could be the case. And there's one theory that actually he was reburied that would reconcile the two traditions, that maybe his grave is in this place on the property of the Mani family, and that he was originally buried in above the sea. So it is possible that he was reburied in the late 19th century on the place where this grave is to be found today. So a story that attracts a lot of attention. Of course, people project many things into Shabtai Tzvi today, etc. But basically, these were his followers, and they follow the cult of Shabtai Tzvi. They were not like of course, regular observant Jews. So that's a very, very special story, kind of different from the rest. But now I'll move on in time. We don't really have much. I mean, part of Montenegro was under Ottoman control, the continental areas, and we don't really have any evidence that there were Jews in this area, actually. And the free Montenegro, this little area around Cetinje, around Mount Lovćen, it really was it was small. It was very, it was poor. So there's really no evidence of Jews in the mountains until basically the late 19th century, when Montenegro started to be more, the Principality of Montenegro started to be more developed. So there are cases of a few people in the interior, in the Principality and Kingdom of Montenegro, some doctors, some musicians. I mean, there were a few people of Jewish origin who appeared appear there, but really no community to speak of. So the area where we can find a little more of Jewish presence, it's this area, basically the coastal area, the Bay of Kotor, and all this area towards including Budva as well. This area belonged to the Republic of Venice until the late 18th century, and then after Napoleonic Wars, it became part of the Habsburg Empire. So this was Austria, if you can say it like this. It was from the late, from the beginning of the 19th century until 1918. And of course, this area communicated with the rest, with Dalmatia, which is present-day Croatia. And as it became more developed, there was increasing Jewish presence, especially in Kotor and also in some other towns. I mean, we are talking about a very small number of people. The first mention, that's still from the French administration, from Napoleonic times, around I think 1811. They mentioned that there are 7 Jews in Kotor, for example. So very small number, but there were some, and this number was growing over time in the 19th century. The Jews moved, some from Dubrovnik, some were Sephardic Jews from Bosnia, later when Bosnia became part of the Habsburg Empire. And then in the second half of the century, also from Croatia, from the Czech lands, even from Galicia. I mean, different parts of the Habsburg monarchy. They came for different reasons. What's interesting, basically, well, there was no synagogue, nothing of that sort, because the Jews were dispersed, and there were several dozens of them. So there were not enough of them. And in terms of jurisdiction, they belonged to the Dubrovnik community, because this was basically, there was no state border. So Dubrovnik was the center. And there were some in Kotor, some in Budva, etc., but it was always just a few families until the beginning of the 20th century. Well, in the last Austro-Hungarian census in 1910, they counted over 120 Jews on the coast of this Habsburg part of what's today Montenegro. It's a small number, but actually this number was larger than the number of the Jews in Dubrovnik itself. Dubrovnik was an old ancient community with a very old synagogue, but it was very small. So these Jews on present-day Montenegrin territory outnumbered those who were in town. But really, the community was quite poor, so they didn't have money to have a rabbi. They had some prayer room in Kotor, later in Herceg-Novi, and that's about it. And there's also this one place of memory which you can visit, the cemetery of Kotor, which is small. It's a Jewish cemetery, small but well preserved. So basically, that's the history of the Jews until 1918. I mean, we are talking always about a few people, but in the Habsburg sources we get at least we have at least some information. Well, of course, what remains in the sources: if someone is born, so if someone dies, if someone buys some property or sells, I mean, we just register it. But I mean, we still don't know much about these people, how they actually lived, etc. It's just this basic biographic information about property. So that's the history of until 1918. And well, after I'll speak more about this, about the modern times, which is that's more documented. In 1918, a new country came into being, first called the Kingdom of the Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, and then from 1929 it was renamed the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. So now I'll focus more on interwar Yugoslavia. Now, first, the number of the Jews in the Bay of Kotor and on present-day Montenegrin territory, there were very few elsewhere. So it was mostly this coastal area. It dropped because when the new country came into being, many Jews moved away. They moved to some other parts of Yugoslavia, sometimes places like Zagreb, or sometimes to the countries where they came from originally during the Habsburg times. So, in the census, in the first Yugoslav census, if we count the whole territory of present-day Montenegro, there were 35 Jews in the 1920s. Actually, everybody in Yugoslavia had to be a member of some religious community. So the Jews were registered according to this principle. So these were the people who were officially members of the Jewish community. And then the number began to grow. I mean, slightly. Still, we are talking about several dozen people. So in the 1930s, the number of the Jews, according to official census from 1931, it was 56 for the whole territory of Montenegro. I mean, small number, but still, I mean, people believe that there was nobody. So I mean, it's more than certainly more than that. And who were these people actually? I mean, basically. Very often and stereotypically, people imagine all Jews as merchants, as having something to do with commerce. But in the case of Montenegro, this is not really the case. If those people that when we can find out a little more about them in the interwar period, they were usually working for the state. They were in the service of the Yugoslav state. Some as technical experts. Very often they were doctors and pharmacists. I mean, that's the most typical, I would say, the most typical profession, and that's how people of Jewish origin came to this land, because there was a demand for doctors and for pharmacists. So it's more typical than someone doing business and having a little shop like we know it from some other countries. And also there were also professors, very often professors of languages, and there were women at different women as professors at usually at high schools in Montenegro, in Cetinje, even in the interior, in Plevla and other places. So that's also how and why people, why some Jews came to this country, because there was a demand for professors of languages. So these were, of course, educated people, usually coming from other parts of Yugoslavia, very often from Serbia, also from Vojvodina, from Croatia, sometimes from Bosnia, and they were mobile people. So they very often they didn't stay here. They didn't stay here that long. Sometimes we find traces of them. They were here for several years, and then they, for example, went to Bosnia, or Croatia or Serbia. So they very often they didn't form a permanent settlement. One maybe one illustrative example. One Jewish woman which became which left a greater trace in history. Maria Kohn, born Maria Bergman in Sarajevo. She was born in a basically Jewish family originally from Vienna, and she was the second woman in Bosnia and Herzegovina who earned a PhD degree at the University of Vienna, and she was a teacher. She was basically a language teacher and teaching also Yugoslav literature. She taught at the high school in Cetinje. We find traces of her, interestingly, in the memoirs of some Yugoslav communist leaders, because many of the later communist leaders and partisans, they went to this Cetinje high school, so, and they had fond memories of this lady. She was their favorite teacher. But later Maria Gonbor-Bergman, she went to Bosnia and also to Croatia. She survived the Second World War in the ranks of the partisans, and after Second World War, she was employed by Sarajevo University. She's considered to be the founder of German studies in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So she lived here. For several years. She left, of course, a trace. Many people remembered her, but then, as I said, many Jews who lived here, they were a mobile population, so they later left and they went to some other place. It is impossible practically to establish how many Jews were here, as those who actually lived here at the time when the Second World War started, because the last Yugoslav census it was done in 1931. And another one was supposed to take place in 1941, but that's when the war started. So we don't know for sure how many of them were here in 1941. Now I'm getting to the basically to the Second World War. It will be more I'll speak about it at greater length. The Second World War for Yugoslavia, it started really in 1941. On the 6th of April 1941, Yugoslavia was attacked by Nazi Germany, by Italy, also by Hungary, and later Bulgaria also joined. So that was 1941 for Yugoslavia. The interwar Yugoslav kingdom, it was quite tolerant for most of its existence towards the Jews, but in the last few years, as Second World War was getting closer, this situation started to change. When the war started in other parts of Europe, Yugoslavia became originally it was more allied to France, but Yugoslavia became drifting towards cooperation with Germany and Italy. And the anti-Semitic forces, which were very small before that, they gained more power. So in 1940 already there were some anti-Semitic laws, like restricting the number of Jews at universities and restricting what the Jews can do. Like it was forbidden actually to do commerce with foodstuffs, because that was supposed to be under control of the state, etc. So already before the war there were some the first limitations and the anti-Semitic atmosphere. But before that, I mean, for most of its existence, the Royal Yugoslavia was quite liberal in this respect. And now we are getting really to the Second World War. Well, before my research, I must say, after all I've done and what my colleague Boban Batricevic researched, we still do not have precise numbers of how many Jews were here during the war exactly, and how many of them died, how many survived, but maybe the exact precise number will never be established. But what you can read, I mean, what you can find today, basically there is this number of 30 Jews lived in Montenegro and 28 of them died, and 2 survived. You can find this number in most of literature, and also the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington D.C. is using this figure actually as a given fact. Well, this figure comes from the research done by Jascha Romano, his historian who was active he was a Holocaust survivor himself. And he published a book. He was a very diligent researcher. He researched what he could, and he did interviews with many people. He published his book in 1980. He was not a professional historian. He was a veterinarian by profession, but he did what, because professional historians somehow didn't do it. So he did what he could, and he was an honest man. He wrote at several places in his book, well, I know that this is not complete. Someone else has to continue with this research, because I mean I did what I could find. I could say the same thing about my book. I mean this is not the end. I hope that people will find more, and maybe I'll find even more. But I mean this is not the last word on the topic. Again. So it comes from 1980, and I can tell you that this number is not precise. I mean, there were more Jews living in Montenegro, more than that. I mean, not it was not much more, but probably there were around 50 at least 50 Jews, like domestic, who were settled here, who had their address here in 1941. And more survived, because I mean, 2. That's not enough, because I found out more. I found out far more of them who survived. So there were more Jews living here, and also more survivors. And this number, I mean, 30 and 28 who died, is imprecise. It's a small number. Now I'll tell you one fact. Well, some people were telling me, well, why are you doing this? I mean, why are you researching? I mean, this small country and this small number of Jews, is it worth your time? Is it worth, like doing it for so many years, and you come up with, maybe such little information? And well, during my, the original number, as I said, was 30, which is not true. But in the place where I live in Prague, in the house in my neighborhood, I mean, Prague is much better researched when it comes to Jewish presence. There were 30 Jews from my address, from the same house, taken to concentration camps. So I was writing the book, at the in a place where there was the same number of Jews as officially as was in all of Montenegro, just in my address. No one survived out of those who were living in the same entrance, in the same house. But it's still worth it. We are all individuals. Seems like I mean, I don't have a problem with these small numbers. I also studied anthropology, and anthropologists, they deal frequently with small groups of people, and individual destinies are very important. So really don't care about this, that this is a small country and the number of people and the Jews is very small. Again, I didn't come up with a final number, because the evidence is very difficult, of course, to find out about what was going on in the Second World War for many reasons. But I mean, apart from the Jews who were like domestic Jews who lived here in the beginning of the war, what is really important is the fact that Montenegro was a place where many Jews escaped from other parts of Yugoslavia in different periods. First, in the very beginning of the war, I'll speak about it in a moment. And then even in 1942, 43, in other years, there were always people going to Montenegro, trying to escape from places where the war was even more more difficult. And I also dealing with the destinies of these people who came as refugees. They far outnumbered the original people. So the original number of the Jews who lived here when the war started in 1941. Now I'll speak more, in a little greater detail about what was going on here during the Second World War. Now, in the spring of 1941, many people were trying, not just the Jews, but also many other people were trying to escape from the Nazi attack, especially trying to escape from the German-controlled areas. And Montenegro being in the south and close to the sea, they hoped that Yugoslavia will manage to defend itself a little longer. So they were escaping really far away from the advancing armies, but then Yugoslavia collapsed pretty quickly. Many of them hoped that, well, Montenegro is by the sea, so they will be taken by ships somewhere else. This was the experience of the Serbian army in the First World War, that they escaped to Albania and that they went to the island of Corfu. But this was not repeated in 1941. People were hoping for British submarines, or maybe that they will be taken by planes somewhere, but well, nothing of that happened, and then they were stuck in Montenegro. But Montenegro in the spring of 1941, it was a far safer place than most of Yugoslavia. I mean, the German-speaking, especially for the Jews, the German occupied areas, of course, Germany immediately introduced anti-Jewish measures, and very soon the Jews were being rounded up and killed, deported, and so on. And another problem was that on a big part of Yugoslavia, present in Croatia, but also all of Bosnia, the puppet state, the fascist Croat state was proclaimed, and they also joined this genocidal policies. So Montenegro was occupied by fascist Italy, and Italy was a fascist state, but they did have some anti-Jewish measures, but they were not conducting the Holocaust they didn't want to conduct genocide. So it was safer for the Jews under Italian occupation, not just here, but also in Dalmatia, because Dalmatia is now Croatia, but Dalmatia was taken by the Italians, so many Jews survived in places like Split. But here, most Jewish refugees went to the Bay of Kotor, around Kotor, and these places, also some in Budva, but mostly in the Bay of Kotor. Well, there was one, basically the only Jewish address in all of Montenegro. It was Villa Carmel in the place called Prčanje near Kotor. That was basically a Jewish summer house which belonged to the Jewish Women's Society of Jewish Women's Society of Belgrade. And this was acquired in the 1920s by the Jewish community of Belgrade, and it was a summer house for children, and many people knew about it because they were there as children, or they knew that it existed. So many of them went to this place called Carmel, and it was kind of this Jewish center of sorts. There were some people from Belgrade who could provide help, but generally after this area became occupied by Italy, the Italians registered the Jews and other people, but I mean they were not harassing them, so it looked they might survive. Somehow they might keep living in this area. But then in July, on the 13th of July 1941, the big anti-fascist uprising started in Montenegro. It was the largest anti-fascist uprising in occupied Europe at that time. And the Italians, it was not really that much for anti-Semitic reasons, but they just wanted to have to know who is who, and they came up with the idea that, well, they will deport, they will round up and deport the Jewish refugees from their territory, from the Bay of Kotor. So the Jewish refugees who found themselves in the Bay of Kotor. One day they were rounded up, and they were imprisoned on a ship in Kotor, and then they were taken to an internment camp in Albania, basically a concentration camp, but not as harsh as those run by the Germans. And well, basically, this was a repressive measure, and the people affected, they were scared. They didn't know what's going on. They didn't know if they would be given given up to the Germans, who will kill them. But in the end, it turned out that this essentially repressive measure saved their lives, because later Italians transferred them later in 1941 to Italy. They were held in the concentration camp Ferramonte di Tarsia in the south of Italy, and this was the first concentration camp liberated by the Allies already in 1943. So basically, all these Jewish refugees, they survived, and thanks to this, we have this chapter in the history of the Second World War and the Jewish history of the Second World War in Montenegro is best documented, because many of these people were still alive in the 1990s, so some of them still in this century, and they recorded their testimonies. So we have this very well documented. I mean, to great detail. So this was one group of around 200 people, which was deported from the Bay of Kotor. But that's not all, because there were other Jewish refugees when this uprising in Montenegro was repressed by the Italians, but there were still always pockets of resistance by the partisans. There were other refugees coming to Montenegro from endangered places there, and later the Italians basically they registered them and sometimes even helped them, but they were not harassing the Jews. There were people who were Jewish and known to be Jewish, and sometimes they were still allowed to teach at high schools, for example, and others they were allowed just to live somehow, so they were not repressed. So people who survived this, they had relatively positive memories of the Italians, of course, in comparison what came later. So until 1943, when Italy basically the fascist Italy collapsed, and this area Montenegro was taken over by Nazi Germany in the fall of 1943. So this was a period when some Jews were surviving, especially in the interior. As I said, they were deported from the coast, but in other places they were surviving. There were two whole Jewish communities from neighboring countries which collectively went to Montenegro. The small community of Sjenica in present day Serbia, in the Sanjak region, around 30 people. They decided that Montenegro will be safer, and they went to Podgorica. They assumed a false identity of Serb refugees from Kosovo. They said they were the big Jovovic family, and they lived there in the middle of Podgorica until the German occupation. And the Jewish community of Visegrad in eastern Bosnia, there were around 120 people. They took a collective decision that that they will go to Montenegro, all of them, and they did it with the help of the Italians, because this the town of Visegrad, it was about to be given to fascist Croatia, and already it was known that the Croatian fascists were giving up the Jews to German hands or massacring them themselves. So all the Jews of Visegrad moved to different places in Montenegro. They survived until 1943. 1943. Well, apart from the Jews as refugees who were surviving in different places, sometimes families, sometimes, as I said, in this one case of Sjanica, it was the whole community which came to Podgorica, although small. There was the partisan resistance in Montenegro, and there were Jewish fighters among the partisans. I mean, some were communists, but they didn't have to be necessarily. The leadership was communist, but they were also the partisans, and when the partisan territory was enlarged, there were also refugees, like civilian refugees on their territory, not only fighters, but there were also women with children, etc., who didn't have to necessarily fight. So that's another story of these people among the partisans. And the most prominent personality was Moshe Piade. Moshe Piade was one of the leading communists in the interwar period, and also in after the war. And he came here basically as a refugee. He managed to get out of prison. He spent much of the time in the interwar period in Yugoslav royal prisons, but he managed to get out. And when the war started, he found himself in Montenegro. Moshe Piade was an interesting personality. Actually, he was very well educated. He was an artist. He was a very good painter. He was also a translator. He translated Das Kapital by Marx. Actually, that was the main Yugoslav edition, was translated by him. And he found himself in Montenegro, but he was hiding. First, he was wearing a Montenegrin cap. He was hiding in one house, interestingly near the grave that I mentioned in this archaeological locality, Dukla. So he was hiding there, and later in the Durmitor mountains. Well, the local collaborationists, they made a big thing out of this. I mean, they used this fact that Moshe Piade was somewhere here, and this is what my colleague Boban Batoricevic actually researched in the anti-Semitic propaganda. They completely misinterpreted this whole partisan movement. Actually, they said that it's all led by the Jews, and it's all led by Moshe Piade. And even Josip Broz Tito, who was Croatian, born as a Catholic, they portrayed him as being Jewish. So the two Jews, Tito and Moshe Piade. And Moshe Piade was especially targeted in anti-Semitic propaganda. Why did they do this? I mean, it was instrumental, like saying, well, it's not us. I mean, the true Montenegrins, I mean, they are not fighting against the Italians or against the Nazis. It's all, Jewish these like Jewish leaders misleading them, etc. So they blamed it on the Jews, as often happens with anti-Semites. There's a really like some of this stuff about Moshe Piade is really like horrible and a kind of fantastic, that what like all sorts of crimes were he presumably did all sorts of crimes and doing a lot of bizarre stuff, and running brothels and allowing polygamy among the partisans. I mean, all this stuff which was absolutely untrue. They portrayed him almost as a devil himself. Well, what we found out with Boban Batoricevic was quite the opposite. Well, first he was not really in a great position of command, because this Communist Party in Montenegro had its own structure. He was here more, although he was important, but he was here more as a refugee, so he was more organizing some smaller things. And actually in 1942 he was in the Durmitor Mountains, and he learned that his whole family was wiped out in Serbia. I mean, pretty much everybody from his family remained in Belgrade, and he had a nervous breakdown, and he was not he just couldn't do anything for for maybe like 2 months. So it's a very, very sad, I mean, personal tragedy. So he was coming through this, and well, in communist historiography they didn't mention it very much, but I mean, he just couldn't do anything. He was completely devastated, and was only later in the war when he got kind of over it. He was still greatly attached to his family, and as he was in prison for much of the interwar period, and then this tragedy happened. So it was quite the opposite of what the anti-Semitic press was writing about him. Well, now I'll move to the most tragic part of the Second World War, basically to the German occupation. Now, Germans took over Montenegrin territory, not everything, because the partisans' resistance in the mountains, I mean, they couldn't control everything anymore. So they focused on the major towns, on coast, etc. And that was in the fall of 1943. Well, they didn't start to harass Jews right away, but first they waited. They waited to see who is where. They took some evidence, and as many people, I mean, not everybody was living a secret life. Sometimes these were families, and you had to apply for coupons to get bread. So you had to be registered. So people lived under the Italian occupation relatively openly. And well, first some continued with this existence even in the beginning of the Nazi occupation. There were cases of people living really under totally false identities, living in hiding, etc. And so some of them were really like disconnected from everything, but the Germans found out about many people living in towns. I mean, they found out where they are, and then they organized basically this operation of rounding up the last in the last area that was previously under Italian occupation. It included not just Montenegro, but also Kosovo. There were still some Jews in Kosovo, maybe around 300 of them. And in Montenegro, they managed to identify around 120 Jews living half openly, sometimes in hiding. And they arrested them in February 1944. So it was several months after German occupations when they saw who is where. So it was done by the Gestapo, with some help of the local collaborations. The Chetniks, they had this great Serbian ideology. So they were collaborating with the Nazis, so with some of the local gendarmes, and they rounded up the Jews whom they could find in towns. First, they were held in different places, mostly in Podgorica, some also in Cetinje, for around 2 months. Then they transported them to a place called Sajmište, next. It's basically in Belgrade, where they kept them for some time, and most of them ended up in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, where most of these 120 people lost their lives by the end of the war. But some survived. Some survived. So. We have evidence. Of that. Well, these were mostly people, mostly not the local Jews. There were some of the local ones, but most of them were refugees who were hiding. Yes.
Kosovo.
Yeah, that was. But these were mostly from Kosovo. Yeah.
Like it's a larger number.
Yeah, larger number. But on Montenegrin territory, there were around 120 who were, and the rest was in what's now Kosovo. Actually, there were more of them there. Yeah, but it was one united. I mean, altogether there were around 500. That includes both places, basically. So this was the destiny of some of the Jews in the towns. But actually, apart from this like very tragic story, the truth is that quite a few Jews survived in Montenegro in the end, but in different ways. And well, if you deal with this history of the Second World War in some other places, it's a little more optimistic in Montenegro, because really there are many interesting stories of how the local people of all religions basically helped the Jewish refugees. Very often they didn't know, they just helped someone in need. They didn't ask questions. They just helped them. And well, it was, it could cost them their lives. I mean, the Nazis would wipe out whole families in revenge if you were hiding the Jews or some also other people that were running from the Nazis. So in the end, there were far more Jews who survived in Montenegro than those who were killed, actually. But the number is uncertain, because in some cases, of course, this was secret. Well, the Jews who survived, they went on with their lives after the wars, and the locals very often they were not flashing with their humanity, and with this they just after the war life went on, and they just didn't. Very often we found out that the saviors, they were not talking about it. I mean, just did it. They risked their lives during the war, but well, they were not talking about it. They were not making heroes out of themselves. So we know some, in some cases we know of the saviors. Of some of the stories are recorded. Sometimes we just know that it happened, and in some cases we don't really know. That much. So I try to collect what could be collected, of course, and I'm sure that there will be more cases, but well, unfortunately, and this is not only the case in Montenegro. The testimonies of the survivors started to be recorded only quite late. I mean, later in the 20th century, basically from the 1990s onwards, when, of course, if someone was of the older or middle generation and survived, well, by that time, of course, they were no longer alive. So what we know are the stories of people who were young, or sometimes even children during the Second World War, and they lived long enough to tell their story, of course, 50 or 60 years later. So some of it went totally unrecorded, apart from a few cases when just people wrote down something, or some people kept diaries. But I mean, it's mostly was impossible to keep and dangerous to keep a diary during the Second World War. So we are still piecing it from these fragments. So I used as much of these testimonies as I could, because there are really interesting details about the Second World War, about the individual lives. Well, each story is different. Some people survived, in different places. Some people survived among Muslims, among Catholics, among Christian Orthodox. Some people were saved by communist partisans. I mean, it's always a different. Each case is very unique. So now I'm getting to the end of the Second World War. Well, by the end of the Second World War, people who were survived here as refugees, usually they went somewhere else to their place, to the place where they came from, or they continued. Some of them emigrated beyond Yugoslavia right away. And as for those domestic Jews, people who were here, people who were living here before, well, many of them didn't return to Montenegro. There are very few. Several there were several individuals, several families which can claim continuity from basically in the Bay of Kotor. There are some which came back, but otherwise, after the Second World War, I mean, there were very few Jews who remained in Montenegro, because those, as I said, those survivors, they went elsewhere. Then and of course there was emigration to Israel after its founding. After the state of Israel was founded in 1948, there were four waves of Aliyah to Israel. This was well organized in partly thanks to Moshe Piade, the guy I mentioned before, who was in Montenegro. So he was quite important in this. Yugoslavia did it in quite an orderly way. We have evidence. But as for Montenegro, there were basically only two Jewish families which went from Montenegro to Israel, and in both cases these were people who came to Montenegro only after the Second World War. They were not the domestic Jews who were, I mean, not the Jews who lived here before. So again, very small number. And now I'm getting a little bit beyond of what I wrote in this book to the socialist period. Well, basically, for the socialist period, as I said, the common knowledge was that, well, there are no Jews in Montenegro, as I said in the beginning. However, there were individuals, there were families of Jewish origin. Well, the typical who moved here, usually again, just like in the interwar period, as professionals of different kinds, doctors, and other people of other professions. And well, the typical pattern was, we're not talking about a great number of people, but the typical pattern was basically that these were mixed families. Someone from Montenegro, usually, it's almost anecdotic when you speak to some people of Montenegrin, of these people of Jewish and Montenegrin origin. They usually tell a similar story, that there was a Jewish woman from other part of Yugoslavia, very often from the Vojvodina region, from like Hungarian-speaking Jews who survived the war, and men from Montenegro, an officer or intellectual. They met somehow, usually not here, usually somewhere else, and then they came to live in Montenegro. Or in some cases, people of Jewish origin were employed as state employees, usually in Montenegro, and they started a family here. But again, in socialist Yugoslavia, the number of Jews, of course, dropped. I mean, around 80% of the Jews were in all of Yugoslavia died in the Holocaust, and then, of course, the people freely, those very often those who were observant and who were more conscious as Jews, they chose to emigrate to Israel. So this number again dropped in the 1950s, and the Jewish community in Yugoslavia was reconstructed, but of course, just like everywhere after the Holocaust, mostly in the larger cities, so in Belgrade, Zagreb, and Sarajevo especially, but there was no Jewish infrastructure and nothing in Montenegro itself. Montenegro was considered to be the only place in Yugoslavia where there were no Jews. Well, this was not true, as I said, because there were these people of Jewish origin and Jewish kind of these Jewish Montenegrin families, which came into being after the Second World War through mixed marriages. Officially, and few people actually realize this, but officially the territory of Montenegro under Yugoslavia still would belong to the under the jurisdiction of the community in Dubrovnik. But this Dubrovnik community was really small. There were around 20 Jews left in Dubrovnik, and there's evidence that actually there were maybe like four to six people from the territory of Montenegro in the 1980s who were registered as members of this Dubrovnik community. Very small number, and this community itself was very small. And apart from them, there were several people in Montenegro who were registered as members of the Belgrade community. But through the fact that they came from Belgrade originally before they moved to Montenegro, or they just lived there before that, so they were registered there. But I mean, that was just official. I mean, there was no Jewish infrastructure. I mean, nothing like that here. So they were registered there as Jews, but really there was no Jewish life to speak of, and even the as I said, the Jewish community of Yugoslavia considered this area as being without Jews. So this is the situation. This is a situation in at the, let's say, under socialism, and of course Yugoslavia was a secular country. Many Jews were well integrated into society. They were primarily Yugoslavs, or sometimes they would claim, I mean, even if they were conscious of their Jewish origin, but they would claim the nationality in their republic. So here I would say they were, let's say, they are Montenegrins, etc., or Yugoslavs. So there were not really many who would say that they are Jews by nationality, for example, even in this area. So that's the situation until the breakup of Yugoslavia. And again, when Yugoslavia broke up in the 1990s, well, even this territory, when I read some like bulletins and some journals of this Yugoslav Jewish community from Belgrade, which was now later on only for Serbia and Montenegro, they would usually mention that, well, this is only, we are talking about Serbia and Montenegro, but actually Montenegro, well, there are no Jews, it's only Serbia. So it was again the same case that even the Jewish community headquarters in Belgrade, people there thought that there's no one here in Montenegro, maybe apart from this very small number of people who came from Belgrade. And well, that's the situation. That was the situation in the beginning of this century. But I don't want to speak too long. So, well, you probably know the rest of the story. After Montenegro became independent in 2006, a few people who were conscious of their Jewish origin, they were kind of meeting informally. Then they decided that they will form an non-governmental organization, which is easier for them to organize something. But then they elected Yasha Alfandari as the head of the non-governmental organization. But Yasha Alfandari thought that it's far better to create a Jewish community, a Jewish religious community, as it is in other countries, even though there's a small number of people. And this Jewish community was registered also with the help of Jewish international organizations officially in 2012. And so since then it all started, and it was the first time that really a Jewish community with a seat in Montenegro was founded. So it's a very new recent history, and well, you know the rest probably. So okay.
Wow. Very cool.
Thanks.
Important, and it is very, very important information, because we live here and we want to live here together, and need to understand what happened here in this history of our community. Sure, it's very important for us. Thank you very much for your very, very big job. It's for our community really important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for inviting me.
Okay, guys. Who will first? Leo, okay.
Thank you, Professor, for this great lecture. My question is, I know this is not directly part of the subject, but you mentioned quite a few times a community in Dubrovnik. Could you briefly tell us what it was about during centuries and why? Why Dubrovnik?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, Dubrovnik. Dubrovnik was basically it's an old town, now very touristy. It was a small republic. It was a small, like, independent city republic, like similar to those city states on the territory of Italy, actually, and. It was like based on commerce there, basically, and when the Ottomans came to the Balkans, it became a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire. Actually, this actually helped them in a way against their competitors, the Republic of Venice. Otherwise, they would probably be risking conflicts with Venice. But as Turkish subjects, it was easier. And they also gained access to the Ottoman markets, where the Venetians had problems, like doing business there, and it was in some ways more liberal than some of the Christian states during the period. So the Jews started settling in Dubrovnik from the Middle Ages. They were living there. They have in Dubrovnik, there's one of the oldest preserved synagogues in Europe, but later the community was quite small. But still, talking of this kind of liberal approach, there was for example, people would be coming to Dubrovnik, Jewish people who were forcibly converted in some other places, like Spain, for example. And in Dubrovnik, they could reassume their Jewish identity. They could just be Jewish again, which shows that it was more liberal. It was more liberal than in some other places. But the Jews lived really in. They were very often doctors, as I said. And other professions, but very often they were doctors. They were living within the city. But then later, I mean, what I was talking about, like concerning Montenegro, and so one more thing: the Jewish community in Dubrovnik, it was essentially Sephardim. Later on, of course, later on, there were other Jews coming to Dubrovnik under the Habsburg Empire, so there were also like Ashkenazi Jews, but usually they had even like this the kind of Romance-sounding names like Tolentino, etc. So it was more Sephardic. Or a Sephardic community. They had links with Sarajevo, for example, with the community there. But they lived in the city. So, but in the late 19th century, under the Habsburgs, they were also moving. Like some Jews were moving out of the city walls, because it was the glory of Dubrovnik was no more. I mean, it was beautiful city and they had great traditions, but it was poor. So many sought employment there, opportunities, and that's how some of them moved to the Bay of Kotor. We found some of them as judges in Kotor, for example, and doing different jobs. So they kind of moved beyond the city walls. It's interestingly a reverse case than in some other countries where Jews were not allowed to be in towns. They lived somewhere in the villages, and only later in the 19th century, in the century of liberalism, they moved to town. So in Dubrovnik, it was basically vice versa. Yeah.
Thank you. Sure.
First, I want to thank you very much. Thank you so much for this fascinating lecture. First time I heard you in Cetinje. And three small, very short questions. First of all, can we explain the contradiction between the number 30 and 28 people that passed away, that were murdered, and only 2 left, with the main theory of history that you tend to say? Can we answer that contradiction by saying that most of the Jewish people that came here at the time of the war and after the war surviving were basically not from here, and therefore that answers it? Like you said later on in the lecture, that answers it, that basically most of the survivors that were not documented basically were people that were actually not from here. And therefore, they ran away here because it was easier than the other parts of Yugoslavia, for example, and they found refugees. If they found refuge here, they were able to survive here. And therefore, that can possibly answer that contradiction.
Yes, well, it's like two things. This number, which was used by the researcher Yasha Romano, it was supposed to be the number of those Jews who lived here, not counting the refugees. So this was supposed to be the number of the local Jews, like saying like there were 30 Jews living here. Out of them, 28 died and two survived. And actually, this number is too small because more Jews lived here as those domestic Jews. According to me, there were maybe 50 of them, because, and I mentioned that in the book, we know of cases, and that of the survivors who lived here in the 30s and who survived the war, more than two. I mean, there were more than that of the people who survived, and I could even name some of them. So it's more than two, certainly, because there were more than 30 Jews living here. Plus, then there are the refugees, of course, and different waves, as I said. I mean, some came in 1941, 200, they survived in the Italian concentration camp, of course, and then there were the 120 who were arrested by the Nazis. Out of them, over half died, but some again survived, and then there were survivors in elsewhere. So these are two things. But this number was supposed to concern the number of those like domestic Jews who had address in Montenegro.
For example, I mean, when I arrived here 7 years ago, I met many families, like you said before, that their father was not Jewish, but their mother was Jewish. I mean, their oldest Jew today living in Montenegro is 92 years old.
Uh-huh.
We spoke about him several times.
Yes.
Professor Serge, when I met him, he's a Holocaust survivor. And when I met him the first time, he said, "You Jews are very bright people." I told him, "Professor Serge, but you are also part of the program." I mean,
Yeah.
So that was the first time we met. I mean, several times later, he was saying us Jews. But in the beginning, he told me, because his mother had to convert to Christianity in those days in order to get married. Those days was popular, you want to marry, so you gotta do that move. And he and his sister Maria, remember Maria, they didn't count in the beginning. They were very respectful to the part, but so that's something, just to prove what you were saying before. Next question, short question, Professor, is as follows. It's a little controversial. I read your book, not the whole. I read most of your book. Thank you, very nice one book, and I gave your book as a present to many people around it.
Yeah.
Also to the Prime Minister and the President of the country. And I want to. There's a few times in the book which you quote different people saying things. And that's what I really like. You mentioned Yasha Afendari, for example, blessed memory. He said something. But how does he know that? He only arrived here in the 1990, whatever. I mean, I know him. He was a very knowledgeable person, but still, when you, just to understand how when you quote somebody in the book, where does he know? I mean, in Torah, we're now in Pesach. Pesach is all about history, and you got to prove everything we say. We got to prove. Jewish people are very into proving things. When you quote somebody, where does he get? Where does Yasha Afendari get his information? That's something I really want to understand. I want to, these people say something. Where do they get it? I mean, they're.
Yeah, well, I quoted Yasha several times in the book like this was his to illustrate like this was his opinion. Also, for example, I quoted him like because he was the chairman of the first chairman of the Jewish community here. So I quoted it like this. This was the knowledge of this was his knowledge about the war. I mean, this is what he knew in, let's say, 2017 when I met him, and we are moving further from that because and I also quoted him because he had this information about the Sefer Torah from Kotor being transferred to Dubrovnik. I mean, we don't know if that is true or not, but I mean, I quoted it because we have no other information. So and I said, well, this is his opinion. I mean, it's clear. I mean, I'm not saying it without that, like stealing his idea. So I think hopefully the reader can tell the hard fact from this.
Got it. Thank you for the clear answer. Last question. I'm sorry, I'm giving the mic to somebody else. I had a guest here from the UK a few years ago, an older fellow, and he brought his map here. And on this map, I don't know what map is called. It's like what's the oldest company of maps? It's famous. I forgot the name. And on this map, he had all these areas from Igalo, like Novi, Kotor Bay, the whole Tiva area with small Magen David signs in different places. You aware of that? Not only to the No. I'm talking about like 20 different points in the map of a Star of David on the map. And he came all the way here from, I'm trying to, you aware of this little 25 different points of Magen Davids all around this Star of David's all around? I don't know. I took a copy of this.
Uh-huh.
I have it somewhere in the Chametz, but I don't know where I put it. I didn't get to it because I didn't have time because But just interesting. I don't know. Just wanted to mention that. I don't know if you're aware of that or not, because I think you know much more than many of.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, I'm aware of this. I must say I haven't seen the map. I mean the real map, but there were some copies of if we are talking about the same thing. I mean you can find it. So, but who knows whether this reflects some reality or because maps don't necessarily prove that there was something. Maybe it's some projection. Maybe there was, and also there's another thing like the Star of David was used also by others. I mean now it's primarily of course a Jewish symbol, but it was used also in Islamic culture, etc. It was not like the old unquestionably Jewish symbol. If somewhere in iconography it was menorah. I mean menorah is just that's not Christian, that's not Islamic, right? But the Star of David, it was used in other cultures without the connection. And well, the maps, I mean, it looks like a hard fact, but sometimes you find maps with people just want to fill the space with something, and it just even maps of the Balkans, like inexistent mountains and cities elsewhere, etc. And so on. So who knows? Maybe it proves that it proves something, and maybe not. I'm not sure of the origin. Yeah, it's rather a question for. It's really a question for someone who's an expert on maps from that period, who could say, well, maybe this company it's relevant, or maybe which produce it, or maybe okay, they were that's not based on reality. Who knows what it is?
Thank you. I want to say maybe need to make second books together with you and you more experience, because it's really interesting information. Maybe next year, next book together. Next event we are meet. Yes. Okay. Nice. Do you have questions, maybe? Or we close it? Okay?
Well, I think
Oh.
Program director for this wonderful, wonderful arranging of this lecture and many, many, many beautiful programs. Sorry for
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for help, Nikita. Together we help us for people who can't do real hair because very much people live in Bar, Podgorica, Herceg-Novi, and they sent me a message, please, Tanya, made for this events video, and Nikita helps with me. It's very important. Thank you very much. Okay. We are closed today events, and I think it's magic that you are here, we are here, and we speak about it because now time when really hard for us, we think about Israel, Russia, Ukraine, and we understand that it's need to life, but if we didn't understand what happened in this our new home, it will hard for us. I think it's a new step for our community for understand it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.